she'll listen closely. When darkness wraps the world and dreams begin to stir, you've arrived at the right place. Welcome to Between Dreams and Shadows, the sanctuary of stories that live between sleep and the unknown. Here, every tale is more than a story. It's a portal to hidden worlds, forgotten secrets, whispers from beyond, and shadows that speak as your eyes begin to close. If you're drawn to mysteries, haunting legends, and stories that send shivers down your spine, this channel is your new nighttime ritual. Before we begin, I invite you to become part of this growing nightbound community. Subscribe now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale. New stories drop regularly, always under the veil of night. Like this video if you enjoy that chill before sleep. It helps this channel grow and lets me bring you deeper, darker stories. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a strange dream or felt something watching in the dark? Your experience might inspire the next tale now. Take a deep breath, turn off the lights, leave the world behind, and get ready to drift between dreams and shadows. The night my mother first told me the story, she sat at the foot of my bed, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Our house sat alone at the edge of a forest, where the trees leaned unnaturally close to one another, their twisted limbs forever casting clawed shadows on the windows. It was the kind of place you didn't choose to live in, it chose you. And once you were inside, the silence became a sound of its own. I was 9 then, and even at that age, I sensed the house held secrets. The air was always just a little colder in the corners, like something waited just out of view. Sometimes, when I was alone, I felt as though the walls were breathing with me. Inhale, exhale, pausing only when I noticed. The room I slept in had once been my grandmother's. The wallpaper faded lavender with barely visible rose, spilled in slow strips. Near the ceiling, as though retreating from something overhead. The closet door never quite shut right, always hanging slightly ajar, no matter how often we fixed the hinge. That night, with a storm crawling across the sky, my mother began. There are stories, she said slowly, that aren't really stories. They're warnings, and our family has one. Her eyes didn't blink as she spoke. Her tone wasn't playful. This wasn't a bedtime tale. It was a confession. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. She simply looked at the window. It was open, just a crack, though I didn't remember opening it. Outside the trees rustled, though the wind hadn't picked up yet. I felt something then. Not fear, not yet, just curiosity's uneasy cousin. The feeling that something was watching, but respectfully, waiting just beyond the edges of my understanding. That night, long after my mother left the room, I stared at the window. The crack in the glass reflected only part of my face, and for a moment one short breath held. Second, it wasn't my eyes looking back. Just a trick of the stormlight, I told myself. Just a trick. But something had begun. Something had been waiting for me to hear the story. And now that I had, it was awake again. The next morning the house was too still. Not quiet still. There's a difference. Quiet is what you expect when you wake up early, maybe before anyone else. Stillness, on the other hand, is the absence of something that should be there. The kind of hush that suggests something is waiting to resume. After you leave the room, I walked down the hall, barefoot. The wood beneath my feet colder than usual. I noticed the picture frames were slightly tilted, every single one, and yet none had fallen, despite the storm. It was as if something had passed through during the night. Something that respected order but didn't understand it. In the kitchen, my mother was washing the same teacup again and again. Her eyes didn't lift when I entered. "You shouldn't ask me to finish that story," she said. I hadn't asked. I hadn't said a word. Later, while brushing my teeth, I caught it again. In the mirror, just over my shoulder, something moved, not fast, Not slow, just enough to be noticed, then gone. I turned quickly, but the hallway behind me was empty. Only the slight sway of a hanging coat, though no door had opened, and no breeze passed through. That night, I tried not to think about it. I told myself it was the atmosphere, the isolation, the story nesting in my thoughts. But when I turned off the light and pulled the covers up to my chin, something felt off. I knew I'd left my desk chair pushed in. It was now turned slightly toward my bed, just enough to suggest that someone or something had been sitting there watching. And then came the shadows, subtle at first. A darker patch on the wall, an elongated silhouette that didn't match the furniture. They didn't move when I moved. They didn't belong to me. I reached for my lamp. The bulb flickered, then steadied, but the shadows didn't vanish. They stayed, fixed in place, as if burnt into the room. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that the story was just that, a story. But deep inside, a quieter voice asked, what if the story told me what to notice? And now that I was noticing, reality was responding. It began as a hum, low, distant, almost mechanical, the kind of sound you'd assume came from faulty pipes or a distant power line, except our house had neither. It came at night, always after I turned off the lights, and it didn't have a clear direction. It didn't seem to come from the room. It seemed to fill it, as though the air itself had begun to vibrate. I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, refusing to acknowledge it. But the more I tried to ignore it, the clearer it became, a hum, then a pattern, like words spoken through gritted teeth, blurred into something almost musical. Sometimes it felt like it was behind the walls, sometimes under the bed. Once, I swear it came from inside the pillow. When I finally mentioned it to my mother, she only shook her head and said, "It's starting again." Again. She wouldn't answer. She just placed a small object in my hand, an old metal key, rusted and cold. "If you ever hear it too clearly," she whispered, "lock the wardrobe. Not your wardrobe. The wardrobe." I didn't ask. I just nodded. That night, the sound changed. It became something else. Whispers, not words. Not fully. More like the syllables were being chewed apart by a mouth that had never truly spoken. A language close to understanding, but just wrong. And they were near. Closer than ever before. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The whisper wasn't coming from outside. It was inside, like it had found a way to echo in my thoughts. Then, I heard it speak one phrase. Just one. Clear, deliberate, meant for me. "Tell the story back." It sent a chill down my spine. How do you tell back a story you didn't finish? The whisper stopped immediately after that. No fade, no drift. Gone like a light switched off. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the wardrobe. Its door had never been locked. I had never even noticed the keyhole before, but now it looked different. Almost like something behind it was waiting for the sound. 2. The feeling of being watched became constant, not just at night, during the day. 2. Even outside the house, I began to feel it. At first, it was subtle. A tingle at the base of my neck. A lingering hesitation before turning a corner. The way I'd flinch slightly before opening any closed door, unsure of what might be waiting on the other side. But it escalated, slowly and methodically, like it wanted me to understand. I was never alone now. The wardrobe in my room became the center of it all. I avoided it, but it always seemed aware of me. Every time I walked past it, the key my mother gave me tied around my neck would feel heavier, almost tugged in its direction. One morning, I found it cracked open, barely an inch. I knew I hadn't opened it. Inside, my clothes were all still there, but they were different. They weren't folded the way I left them. They were rearranged. Each shirt, each pair of pants, turned inside out. All of them, and lying at the bottom, in the darkest corner. was something that didn't belong, a single, withered black feather. We didn't have birds. The windows were closed. It was placed there, later that evening, as I sat at my desk, trying to sketch to distract myself. I dropped my pencil. When I bent down to retrieve it, I froze out from beneath the bed. In the sliver of space between the floor and mattress, I saw something smooth, gray, motionless, skin, not a hand, not a foot, just a patch of skin, like someone was lying face down, silently pressed against the underside of my bed. I didn't scream, I didn't move, it didn't either. But when I finally found the courage to rise, to stand, to look under the bed, there was nothing, and yet, the weight of its presence remained. The air was denser, thicker, like something had been there so long that it left a memory behind, etched into the room itself. From that point forward, objects started to move when I wasn't looking. My chair would face the wardrobe, the closet. Light-long broken wood flicker to life for seconds at a time. One night, I woke to find all the drawers in the room pulled open just enough to whisper. And always, I could feel the presence. It never showed itself. It didn't need to. It was in the silence, in the small movements, in the way the corners of the room seemed just a little too dark, and in the unmistakable feeling that if I turned around too quickly I'd finally see it, but it wouldn't have a face, because it didn't need one. There is a kind of silence that feels like pressure, not the peaceful kind, the waiting kind, the kind that makes you hesitate to breathe too loud, as if drawing attention could break some fragile pact. That's how the house felt now. Everything had slowed. My movements, my thoughts, even time, seemed reluctant to pass. It was as though the presence didn't just live with us anymore. It had settled in. My mother, once the one who seemed to understand it all, had grown distant. She barely spoke. When she did, her eyes never met mine. "The more you notice it," she said one night while staring out the kitchen window, "the more it notices you back." She had started sleeping on the couch. She said her room was too loud, though nothing ever made a sound. It was around then that I began to see patterns. They weren't obvious at first, just strange consistencies. The lights flickered every night at exactly 3:12 a.m. The black feather I had thrown away reappeared 3 nights in a row, each time in a different drawer. The hum from earlier returned, but now it pulsed in sets of 3. Then came the markings. They started on the mirror, barely visible, like condensation had been dragged across the surface with a fingertip. Swirls and loops, spirals that never quite closed. They appeared only at night, and only when I dared to look closely. Once, I traced one with my own finger. That night, I woke up with a single word carved into the dust on my nightstand. Closer. I hadn't written it, and I wasn't sure what it meant. Closer to what? That same day, while cleaning out a drawer in the living room, I found something hidden between old books. A thin journal wrapped in gray fabric. No name, no date. Inside, written in trembling handwriting, were brief entries, most of them scratched out, but one page remained untouched. It read, "There is no warning, only recognition. You do not summon it, you inherit it. The story was never yours to hear, but now it is yours to keep. Lock the door, forget the voice, and do not finish the story out loud." The final sentence was underlined twice, written in a hand so forceful the ink had bled through to the next page. I shut the book. Suddenly, it all made sense. The story my mother told MIT wasn't to scare me. It was to pass something on, a burden, a presence, a watcher, and the wardrobe. It hadn't opened to show me something. It had opened to see me. I stopped sleeping, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't. Sleep meant surrender, and surrender meant I might wake up with something closer than before. The air in my room had changed. It wasn't just heavy, it pushed against me, like I was sharing the space with something territorial, something that didn't want to be seen, but deeply resented being ignored. I began to avoid the wardrobe entirely. I covered the mirror, removed the light bulb from the closet, started sleeping with the key clutched in my hand like a charm, but the presence had grown bolder. At exactly 3:12 a.m. every night, I would wake up no matter when I had gone to sleep. The same second, the same stillness, and then the whisper would begin again. Faint, measured, tell it back. Tell it back. But this time, it wasn't coming from nowhere. It was coming from inside the wardrobe. Not scratching, not banging, just speaking like something was. Crouched behind the closed door, mouth pressed to the crack. Whispering patiently through the keyhole. I couldn't take it anymore. The pressure of not knowing, of half seeing and half hearing. I had to know. Even if it was a mistake. Even if it meant inviting something in. So, one night, I sat facing the wardrobe. I didn't flinch when the lights flickered. I didn't look away when the feather drifted from the top shelf though. I hadn't placed it there, and when 3:12 arrived and the whisper came again, I leaned forward and whispered back, "I'm here. Tell me." Everything stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The lights froze mid-flicker. The air turned dead still. Even the distant hum of the outside world cricket's wind, the house groaning in its bones all, went silent in a perfect vacuum. And then, the wardrobe creaked open. Just an inch. No more but. Inside it wasn't dark anymore. It was deep. Not like a shadow, like a space. A hallway. A room. A place that didn't belong in the physical geometry of my home. And from that opening, I saw something. Watching not with eyes, with awareness. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But I understood it. This story was never meant to be heard. Not all the way through. It was meant to lead someone to tempt them into choosing to know more. And once that choice was made, there was no turning back. I had opened the door. Now I had to decide. Retreat, or step inside. I stood. I reached for the key, and the wardrobe, as if recognizing me, opened wider, just enough for me to see that whatever waited beyond was not in this world. It was under it, behind it, older than it, and it had remembered me. I did not remember walking into the wardrobe. There was no decision, no grand moment of courage or madness, just a shift. 1 second I was standing before it. The next, I was inside, but it wasn't a closet anymore. The space stretched far beyond what should have been possible. The floor was wood, but it creaked with a strange rhythm, like it was breathing beneath my steps. The walls weren't walls at all, but layers of peeling paper, repeating the same sentence again and again. You were told not to listen. It wasn't written in ink. It was written in something darker. Something that flaked when I touched it, like ash or old blood. I should have turned back, but when I did, there was no door, just more hallway, more dim, flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere. The silence pressed harder here, not the kind that demanded listening, but the kind that threatened to replace sound forever. As I walked, the air thickened. I could feel my thoughts slowing, memories slipping like water between my fingers. It didn't want me to remember. It wanted me to become part of the story. A detail, a whisper. And then, I saw her, standing at the far end of the corridor. My mother, but younger, pale, expressionless. Her mouth moving but no sound escaping. Her eyes wide and empty, like something had hollowed her out and left a puppet behind. She raised one hand, slowly pointing behind me. I didn't want to look, but I did. And there, crawling from the wall, not out of it, but through it, was a shape. No face, no limbs that made sense. Just an idea of a being, stitched together from what fear might look like if it became flesh. And as it neared, the whisper returned, but not from outside, from within me. You've heard too much. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. My legs gave way, and I collapsed into the floor that now pulsed like living skin. This was it, the end, the punishment for curiosity. But it didn't touch me. It didn't have to. It simply stood over me, imposing, eternal, and somehow satisfied. It hadn't needed to take me. I had already given myself to it. When I awoke, I was back in my room. Morning light leaked through the window. The wardrobe was closed, silent. For a long time, I thought it had been a dream, until I noticed the mirror. There, across its fogged surface, written in the same looping hand, was a new message. You belong to the story now. And beneath it, drawn with a finger from the inside of the glass, was a spiral. It was still moving. You might expect that after everything, the fear would pass, that sunlight would banish whatever lived in the corners of that story, that I'd wake, truly wake, and find myself untouched. But that's not how these stories end. Because they don't end, the presence never truly left. It only stopped hiding. Now it moves differently, not in the room, but in me, in my thoughts, in the way silence never feels empty anymore, in the way I flinch at my own reflection, half expecting to see another version of myself watching from behind the glass. Every night, I still wake at 3:12 a.m. without fail. Even when I move houses, even when I unplug every clock, even when I tell myself, this is all in your mind, it's always 3:12, and with it comes the whisper. You told it back, now carry it forward. I don't look at the wardrobe anymore. I don't open mirrors in the dark. I don't speak the story out loud, not fully, because that's how it finds new listeners. That's how it spreads. I see it in others sometimes, in the way someone on the bus avoids looking into the window, reflection beside them, in the way a neighbor pauses in their doorway at night, sensing something just behind them, too close to name. They've heard pieces, fragments, enough to be noticed, enough to begin. And sometimes, someone asks me about the story, my story, the one my mother told me. They ask if I remember it, and I say, no, it was never really a story, because that's the only answer that might keep them safe. But if you're still reading this, then you've already heard enough. Maybe you'll forget, maybe it'll fade, but maybe, one night, when everything's quiet, you'll wake at 3:12 a.m. and hear something breathing beside you, something patient, something listening. Could you sleep after hearing this? What do you think really happened inside the wardrobe, and was it ever just his story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you dare, choose another tale before bed. But be warned, some stories don't like being heard more than once.